Welcome to the Filmcast review of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Joining us today is Dan Gvozden from the Amazing Spider Talk podcast. I'm going to read the plot summary of this movie, which debatably has minor spoilers, but it's the premise of the movie. But here's a plot summary from the internet. After reuniting with Gwen Stacy, Brooklyn's full-time friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is catapulted across the multiverse, where he encounters a team of spider people charged with protecting its very existence. Dan Gvozden, you are one of the internet's foremost spiderologists, or Spider-Manologists, I should say. Excuse me, I didn't mean to misspeak there.
It's pronounced Spider-Man.
Spider-Manologist. And obviously you have really strong opinions on Spider-Man. Why don't we start with what you thought about the first Spider-Verse movie? And kind of what your expectations were for this one and how you enjoyed Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse.
Yeah, I mean, I was on the show to talk about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, but I think my feelings on that movie have solidified even more and grown in many ways since we initially talked about it. I to this day revere it as like not only the greatest Spider-Man movie, I think it's the best superhero movie ever made.
Wow.
Something backed up by James Gunn, weirdly enough, in a GQ interview recently. But I love that movie. I think it understands Spider-Man, better than any piece of media has expressed outside of like maybe the original comics. It's a beautiful movie that pushed American animation forward. And now you can, in the years since, you've only seen the myriad of, I wouldn't say copycats, but like just the creative doors that have been blown open for a medium that I think was everybody was trying to copy Pixar. And now that has changed wildly from this, I think, a studio that nobody really, the studio of the Emoji Movie.
Dan, you could say that Puss in Boots was an actual copycat.
Yes, yes, I could. Thank you, Jeff.
Jeff.
Dave, there are sequences in that movie that look exactly like they're animated out of Into the Spider-Verse movie.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm here for your puns.
Thank you, Dan.
I'm here for it. Fully supportive.
How dare you, David? How dare you put your head in your hands?
I didn't say anything. I had a headache just now. It was
How dare you express that?
It was coincidental.
Like two black holes colliding. Like just to have Jeff being supported in this way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I love that movie so much, and I think even on this show, I said like it as a movie. And I know this sounds like an insane hyperbole, but it is what convinced me that I could become a father. And my son turns 1 in less than 2 weeks. And I know that I have the thematic ideas of that first movie, not to credit entirely. Obviously, I made the choice, but sometimes a piece of art can speak to you in a particular way that can change your life. And in that instance, if people are watching the video version, I've got the big poster right behind me. Like Into the Spider-Verse has become like an indelible part of my life. Which is to say, like, that's a huge thing for any movie to live up to.
So did the second movie, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, alter your understanding of humanity and your place within it?
Are you giving your child back?
That's it. Yeah. Good thing I kept the receipt. No. I really like Across the Spider-Verse. I think it pushes forward all of the things that like audiences loved about the first movie. The animation is better and more interesting and takes even bigger swings. The characters are, just as grounded and lovable. Like there are scenes in this movie that might as well just be like Jeff's favorite movies, two people sitting down and talking, and, countered with the most hyperactive, all over the place visuals in the next scene. It definitely, maneuvers all of these things. It is, a sequel to Spider-Verse, and it doesn't fall into a lot of the traps that sequels fall into in superhero movies and movies in general. Yes, there are some signs that executives like finally noticed that their company was making a Spider-Verse movie and wanted to like stick their little fingers in it a little bit, in ways that I'm sure we'll talk about in the spoilers. but I don't think it damages the product in any way. This is a movie with something to say, and I will definitely talk about that. I think the worst thing you could say about this movie is that it ends. When it ended in my theater, there was a loud gasp and people shouting no. And I don't even think it's because of like a cliffhanger. It's just because people didn't want that to be the end. Now,
and that was after nearly 2.5 hours with this movie too. So
and I think you could read that multiple different ways. Like my biggest ding on this movie is that I don't feel like the ending feels like the end of a chapter in a larger thing. It literally feels like half of a movie. I think if you maybe rewound it 15 minutes, there was a place to properly end it, but where it ends, it's just getting good. And they're trying to make the comparison to Empire Strikes Back, but I think Empire Strikes Back ends with a solid character arc and a moment of reflection for those characters as they look out onto that, like the rest of the galaxy, and a kind of like restatement about family. I don't think this one has an ending like that. And so I think the better comparison is Back to the Future Part 2. We know there's going to be another one. We sent Marty off somewhere, and we'll find out eventually.
If you had seen Fast 10, Dan, you would have realized that would also
or Dune.
Or The Matrix Reloaded. Dune was a big one too. Yeah.
Matrix Reloaded, those are good comparisons,
and I guess it's just sad to see like the first movie was so singular and its primacy was so clear, and it had a really clear message to say. It stinks a little bit to see this movie caught up in like the practices of this kind of studio stuff. I have no doubt that the third movie will redeem my feelings about this right now, but there's that. And then I have some real problems about the motivations of the so-called villains in this picture that I can get into in spoilers, that really took me out of the movie and really soured me on a big part of it. But I think that feeling is going to be very unique to me, and I'm happy to discuss it when we get to spoilers.
Got it. All right. Well, that's Dan Gvozden's overall thoughts on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I wanted to give a actually minor summer movie wager update. As we're recording this, we don't know how well this movie is going to do, but it does seem like it's going to do extremely well. I think they're estimating.
I think had it highest on his list.
Had it pretty high.
Yeah, they're estimating that it will do up to like $135 million in its opening weekend. Could be more than that. We'll see.
We'll talk about rewatchability too on this one. Yeah,
I will tell you that anecdotally, I went to go see Fast 10, Little Mermaid, and this movie at a local AMC theater on opening day. Like opening day, every single one.
That's quite a day of movies, Dave.
On each of their respective opening days, and this one out of those three was the most packed out of those three.
Same.
Didn't do the same for Guardians because I saw a press screening for that. But I think
I'm very curious about how if this series can change Americans' habits regarding animated films.
Yes,
like for it to leap that much potentially, from the first movie to the second movie, and maybe open people up to this. Like I have friends who are like day one MCU people who won't go see this because it's animated. And I don't understand that. And I'm really hoping that this kind of media pressure can change some of those behaviors.
I will say Peter Serretta put Spider-Verse at number 2, the highest.
Oh, he did.
And right now, as we're talking, that is within reach for Spider-Verse. Like we'll see how well all the other movies do.
I would be really happy if this ended up being number 1. That would screw my list, but this is the movie I would love to see win the summer.
Well, Devindra, hit us up with your thoughts on Across the Spider-Verse. What did you think of this movie?
Sure. I mean, guys, sometimes we have these experiences, right? Where you go to the theater, you're watching a movie, and you're like, this is pretty good, right? This is pretty nice. And then sometimes you have those experiences where like, this is one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life. And I look around and I look at the audience and I look at the faces of the kids watching this stuff. And I think, how lucky are these kids to be living through this? I think this movie is a masterpiece. I
And
think
sometimes
it's
you start
incredible.
screaming at those kids
Yeah.
to their face.
Appreciate it.
You don't know how lucky you are, and sometimes
don't know.
Sometimes you're ejected from the theater against your will, and sometimes you can't go back to that AMC anymore. You
The
know,
kids these days
it
don't
happens.
know.
Sometimes that happens. Okay.
They don't know.
But enough
Yeah.
about Little Mermaid.
All right. Anyway,
Absolutely.
sorry. Go ahead. David.
But yeah, no, I think this movie is incredible. I think it's fantastic. I love the first one. I think this one is even better because it again shows what you can do with animation, and it is a reminder to me. Certainly, I've always loved animation, but this is a reminder like you could do anything. You could do literally anything. It's only your imagination that is kind of holding you back in terms of storytelling. And this is a movie that just goes all the way. Like we've got multiverses. We've got people with really unique powers. We've got a really compelling core emotional story arc with Miles. But even before we get to Miles, we have more stuff with Gwen where we set up her timeline looking gorgeous, by the way, with a fully like watercolor world, just like something I've never seen before in
Earth
moving
65
animation.
is, I want a whole movie there.
It's just
like
beautiful.
Yeah.
Just beautiful stuff. Like it keeps pushing the limits of animation. And I think the limits of like how we think of narrative mediums too, because this is a movie that takes a lot of chances, but at the same time can slow down and give you intimate conversations between Miles and Gwen or Miles and his parents. And I think it also, like the first movie, was very much about like trying to find your place in the world. This one is very much about growing up and maybe drifting away from your parents and having the time to even engage with how the parents feel. Because the parents of a superhero will be like, what the hell is going on with my kid? They're not going to school. Like they're lying to me. I know something is wrong. I found that all just really compelling and really dramatic. And at the same time, this movie just like is just every scene, even though this is a very long movie, feels like it is truly meaningful. You're going from great intimate character scenes to tremendous action to some of the best action I've ever seen in a superhero movie because you can do it because it's animation. Yeah, I loved it. Shout out to everybody involved, especially Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, because again, everything they touch is gold. Also, this is directed by 3 separate people, but specifically Joaquim Dos Santos, who was the director and a producer on The Legend of Korra. He also did that Voltron show on Netflix. I think like you can see the sensibilities he was doing in Korra there a lot in here too, in the way animation and the way action is choreographed and executed and shot. This movie is fantastic. Like it is as close to perfect as I think a comic book movie can be. I cannot wait to watch it again. I just wish my daughter was like old enough to withstand some of the scarier bits, but we're going to get there. Like I cannot wait to share this movie with everybody. Loved it.
I'm so glad you brought up the theme of parenthood because it really does seem that this trilogy of movies is going to be about that, like at the forefront. But I'm sure we can talk about that later.
Jeff Kanata, your thoughts on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say my thoughts on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse are best summed up in the form of a limerick. A masterclass just how it looks. Side characters and common crooks. The film elevates and thus celebrates a lifetime spent with comic books.
Oh, that's a sweet one, Jeff. That's nice.
I agree with everything Devindra said. This is a masterpiece on every level. I think it improves on the first movie in every conceivable way. I think this is the best comic book movie ever made. I think it's maybe, I was trying to think if there's any animated movie that I like more than it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I can come up with one. There are certainly wonderful, stellar animated movies, movies I cherish, movies that have moved me, movies I would put in the pantheon. This is an astonishing achievement to me. I don't know how you make this movie because there are so many ideas in it, so much complex, just sci-fi concepts that seemingly effortlessly conveyed to the audience. They're visually, like, how do you even communicate? I was talking to my animator friend, Lana Bashinsky, who is on the DLC and works in the video game industry as an animator and has for many years. And she was like, I don't even know how you storyboard this movie because you need to storyboard every moment. It is so dynamic. There are so many different visual styles shoved right next to each other. The audacity of how this movie is just composed, where individual characters will be in their own animation style next to other characters who are in a completely different animation style. The first movie, Into the Spider-Verse,
Miles Morales will be like in 3D space, and then there'll be like a 2D Spider-Man next to him in a different frame rate. Basically, it's
fighting a black and white character who's sort of hand drawn. It's just so audacious and brilliant and bold. And the first movie, Into the Spider-Verse, obviously introduced an entirely new visual style that, as Dan mentioned, has turned into a trend, right? And that is, animating on the twos, as they call it, or having that sort of syncopated visual style, and using elements of traditional, two-dimensional comic book framed art, word bubbles, stuff like that. It used that visual shorthand to convey things that I don't think any movie had really attempted in that way. And it was bold and it was interesting. And this one just blows it out of the water. Like, you can't even compare how forward-thinking and innovative this movie is compared to the first one, in my opinion, because, you were talking about Gwen's world, where literally, there's a dialogue scene, and every shot, the reverse shot of the mediums and close-ups, has a completely different background that is abstract and colorful and different than the last time we were in that same shot, but it conveys an emotional reality to what's happening. And that's just one sliver of one tiny fraction of a kind of place that we are. And this movie has dozens and dozens and dozens of different approaches to showing you things. Different characters exist in their own stylistic realities that butt up against one another, interact with one another seamlessly, effortlessly. It is so, just on a pure visual level, it's the most striking, thrilling, exalting thing I've ever seen. I just am completely overwhelmed by the visual language that this movie dares to express to a mainstream audience. This is absolutely unlike anything before it, as far as I'm aware.
I was really entertained looking at the credits and the listing of the artists that they were, credited as helping out. And you've got everybody from every era of comics that they are thanking. And you can see it. I mean, not to get too niche, but Sienkiewicz's stuff, during the Gwen stuff, the abstract expressionist oil paint, I mean, you're right. It is a love letter to every comic ever made.
Yes. And I'm glad you used that phrase. I was planning to use that phrase as well, because you have this sort of bold new interpretation of what animation can be. And as Devindra pointed out, the way the action sequences are composed and how people move and how every single thing feels like the coolest way a character could possibly do that. And then you have a layered on that is a filter of reverence to comic books and comic book storytelling. You have transitions between scenes that are literally like a real life comic book that existed, dropping into frame and showing you, these are comic books that I own, right? These are referencing how, hey, these characters come from a place, have a history, they come from a tapestry of storytelling that we are honoring by bringing them into our world. And it's like I said in my limerick, that as somebody who has spent my life loving comic books and investing in them, it's been such a wild experience seeing the MCU happen and seeing, these things being elevated into the mainstream in such a profound and frankly, overwhelming way. But this movie does it completely differently. It's saying look, we're not just plucking those characters out and giving you their stories. We're actually kind of showing you that all of this time investment, all of the things that mattered to you also matter to us. All of the ways in which you read their stories, the time that you spent in that specific comic book, in that in those eras and how those eras all related to one another. And the way this movie positions itself as part of a grander, they use the word canon in this movie, which, as you know, Dan, is almost a bad word, or has been in the history of comic books, almost a bad word of like a limiting factor, a weight that is a burden on comic book creators. And this movie says, no, look, all of these things that are on the face of them perhaps contradictory or even at odds with one another, have problematic because one thing is too weird for another thing. Look, we can push them all together, make them part of a big family, and it all works. When this movie ended, if they had started it immediately again, I would have stayed in my seat. I am absolutely have no problem with how it ended. I couldn't believe, as the music started swelling, I was like, I didn't know, it was going to end with a cliffhanger. As the music started swelling, I was like, oh my God, is this happening? Is this happening? And to me, the promise of more is so thrilling and exciting. I can't wait to talk about spoilers, because there's so much in this movie that just, Devindra, you said it so well. You're in the theater and you're looking around and you're like, the last time this happened was with Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is funny because these are both movies about multiverses and multiple timelines. But you just go, there's sometimes when you're just aware that you are witnessing a work of utter genius and that is going to be with you forever, and you're going to revisit, and you just like thrilled at the way people are able to bring something to life. And I walked out of there going like, go for it, AI. Try to write that. Try to create that. Like, you can't. It's so vibrant and original and bold and unprecedented. It just, and also beautiful and heartfelt and simple and pure and grounded. And like, there are moments with a family that made me well up and just felt so real. And so, and the representation is so effortless in this movie. And it just feels like one of the greatest things I've ever seen on a screen. It's just an amazing thing.
I'll share a few of my thoughts, then I'd love for us to get to spoilers. Basically echoing everything I don't know that I can say it better than Jeff. That was beautifully said. I will just talk about, I think the first 10 minutes of this movie I thought were really just extraordinary. There's like just the way that the first 10 minutes uses drums and is very like comic book style in terms of the frames and all this stuff, and tells like its own mini arc. And I wrote this in my Letterboxd review. I said, I didn't know the first 10 minutes of an animated movie could make me cry more than Up. But here we are. I found the first 10 minutes to be enormously moving and powerful and just beautiful and just so inventive and creative. And I was just like, I've never seen animation used in this way before. I've never seen so many bold swings just on a minute by minute basis, right? Like every minute they're trying something new. They're throwing some new idea at you, and the brain is barely keeping up. The Everything Everywhere All at Once comparison is really good because like similar experience with watching that movie where you're like, wow, like I caught a 1-second glimpse of this other universe and my mind is spinning and we're already on to the next thing. And that's kind of what this experience of watching Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is like. I think the movie is quite extraordinary and just, I think, probably the most beautiful animated film I've ever seen. I was just like, I don't think I've seen a more beautiful. Watching these watercolors run down the screen, I'm like, I don't think I've seen a more beautiful.
I could make an argument for something like Akira, which is like that's all just hand drawn. That's all like done. But even this is just like aesthetically, I think even better.
It's certainly most innovative. Most audacious, right? Like it doesn't need, maybe beautiful is the wrong word, but certainly I am willing to apply any number of superlatives to it. But.
The Dave Chen
I think it's like it really does feel like half a movie.
It's such a bugaboo for you. I know that you don't like that.
It's okay. So with Fast 10, it's like whatever. Who gives a crap? Like, the adventure's interrupted, but the second half, it's probably going to be pretty similar to the first half. And they arbitrarily cut it off at a certain point, but it's not. But it's a silly, fun popcorn entertainment. Fast 10 is, right? Which is another movie that ended halfway that came out a few weeks ago. this is a movie that has something to say. This is a movie that has a thesis or multiple theses about what makes us who we are, about parenthood, as you guys have said, about fate, and
how to make a sequel.
And how to make a sequel, right?
How to make a sequel.
And here's the thing. I don't know what it's saying until I see the whole story. Like, I don't know. I can guess. I have really educated guesses as to what it's going to say, but I don't think I will fully know what it's trying to say until I see the entire story. Fortunately, we don't need to wait that long. I think March of 2024 is when the next one's supposed to come out.
Correct.
And so, but it's hard for me to say, like, I loved what this movie was saying, because on a big level, I don't know what it was saying because we haven't seen the ending. I don't know what it's saying or the way in which it will say it. But there have been so many highs that this movie delivers, even just without knowing the ending of this story. So many things that I'm like, I can't believe I saw that executed in that way. One of the villains of this movie executed in that way, in a way that I've never seen before. Love story executed in that way. It's just like, so many of those like wow aha moments that, despite this extremely large gap in what I think the movie's like of knowledge of what the movie is, I still think it's extraordinary. So I'll just say one other thing, and then we can get to spoilers, which is I'm impressed with how much of the first movie this movie threw out. And what I mean by that is, like, I'll give you an example, like the musical score of the first movie. Incredible. Like, they reference it in this movie, but most of the music is like its own new creation. It's like they're forging into new territory. And
Daniel Pemberton, man,
yeah,
what a guy.
They could have referred back to it a lot more, because it's like it's like going back to the Superman theme in Superman 2 after you've done it, but it's like, nope, they're doing completely brand new. They could have leaned on more on what they did before, but they didn't. They just kept going in new directions.
And also,
that's how I feel about the visuals too.
Yeah, exactly.
The actual musical choices too, not just the score, but they worked with was it Metro Boomin? Did a bunch of tracks. Like, there's a whole you could go look at that on Spotify right now. Just like, these are all like things created for this movie, and it's like, it's a ton of tracks. It's 13 different songs. Yeah. It's just incredible. Keeps the vibe up. Yeah.
One of the things I was most disappointed with in my experience of seeing this movie, I went to a press screening, and this is not usually the case, or hasn't been my case before I moved to Colorado, but they put us in a movie theater and the audio was not great. And I think this, I was like, I kept sitting there going, oh my God, I need to go see this in the movie theater again. And I need to see it in Dolby. I need to see it cranked up, because I want
Dolby or IMAX, that would be,
I want the audio to surround me in this movie, because it was kind of, I could just feel it coming from the front, and it was kind of low. And I just wanted to be enveloped in, like, when the drumming happens at the beginning, and there's moments where Miles starts swinging through the city and his music comes on. And it's like every character has their own audio style as well as visual style, and it is such a huge part of what makes this movie special, is the audio side of it. That I would urge people to go see this movie in the best theater they can, on the biggest screen with the best audio they possibly can.
I want to add on to something else you said, Jeff, unrelated topic, about the way this movie reveres comic books. And it's almost like what this movie does, I think, is acknowledge the history of comic books, but it's like it rewards the paying attention and the fandom and all that stuff. But it's like, these are characters that all have their own, like, they're all living their own lives. Like, we just stumbled upon them at this point, but like, there's a rich history that you're only getting a tiny glimpse of here, and we're fortunate to get that glimpse. But it's like, it's not just like, hey, like we just introduced Venom to you and thank us. It's like no, like, there's a rich history here that we're drawing from, and like, you get to be part of it now by watching this movie. But like, know that this is all happening for years, and now you're just entering into the story now.
Right.
It's rare for movies to do that. So,
well, how far we've come, because like, remember when the first Guardians of the Galaxy came out, the like tagline for that was "You're welcome." you know, like, and it's like, man, like Guardians of the Galaxy is nowhere near as obscure as like 90% of the things that show up in this.
Well, let's get to this. Sorry, go ahead,
Yeah.
Dan. Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate that you say that it's fortunate to get a glimpse into this, because anytime I've ever talked about any of this stuff, people run. So,
Yeah.
you know,
This is your day to
now
shine.
people are paying tickets. I should just go sit in a theater and just answer
Yeah.
questions. Yeah.
Mhm.
I did say to Dave before we recorded, thank God we have Dan Gavazin on our show. There's no. I walked out of this going, we got Dan on the show. This like I feel like this is you know.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's like looking at an encyclopedia on the screen, and you're like,
Yeah.
I just need somebody to read it to me.
Let's get the spoilers for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse starting right now. Obviously, Dan Gavosden from the Amazing Spider Talk, one of the best things about watching a movie like Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is all the obscure references. Now, you're making an article for Hollywood Reporter where you're going to list them all. So I don't expect you to like recount them all here.
No,
but maybe
all
give
of them.
us
Just list them all
maybe-
right now.
maybe are there a few favorites, like 1, 2, or 3 favorites that you're like, oh, I can't believe they referred to that one in this movie.
Sure. I can pull a couple out. You know, leaning into the world of like video games, I was really pleased. There's kind of a twofold Easter egg with this. In Miles's room on the wall, you can see a poster for a like pro skater game in the vein of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and fans of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 will know that an Easter egg in that game was that you could play as Spider-Man.
Mhm.
And the company Neversoft that made that game would go on to make in the year 2000, I think, one of the best Spider-Man video games for their platform. And not only is there that little tease on the wall of his bedroom, but in the Spider Society, you can see the PS1 model of the Neversoft Spider-Man running around and doing all the things the Spider people do. So, I thought that was like a fun pull.
In the Uncle Ben's, all the Uncle Ben's moments, isn't there the Dreamcast Uncle Ben moment?
I maybe I didn't see that. Again, I'm gonna have to see this a million times.
Oh yeah, because
to
there's so
pull it
many
off.
references to all the different
I
ones.
think there's
when you
a
see-
polygonal Uncle Ben thing that happens in the Uncle Ben moments, and I think it's from the Dreamcast
Wow.
Spider-Man game.
Wow.
Amazing pull, Jeff. Amazing.
Well, an
Wow.
amazing pull for the filmmakers. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is a character that shows up in this film called Typeface, who I've been making fun of on my show for decades, or I guess a decade. My show's like 10 years old. Who is
He's like a Spider-Man villain, right? Called
yeah,
Typeface.
he showed up in this run in like the late 90s, early 2000s, written by this guy Paul Jenkins. And it's a really great run of Spider-Man comics. But the one comic that people like to dump on in that run is this one about this villain Typeface, who is literally a guy who has different font choice letters glued all over his body. And he's never appeared ever again. And here he shows up in like Spider Jail. And it's like, who, now that he's been in a movie, next up is Stegron the Dinosaur Man. Like what's next?
Yeah.
I mean, I
And he
would
said,
say
"You're going to Helvetica," I think is what he said.
Yeah.
was his line.
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like they gave him a line.
Yeah.
So like that, I thought that was pretty insane. There's also a character. They like pan across all these villains. Like there's Mysterio, who is like the Mysterio from the Spider-Ham universe. But there was also like the Green Goblin from the Atari video game was in there.
Yeah.
And
I saw a bunch of Atari stuff. Yeah.
yeah, there's a character named Video Man who looks like he's an Atari character, but he's actually a villain from the cartoon show from the 80s called Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And he's a character that's created by Electro in a video game that Spider-Man and Iceman and Firestar are sucked into. And it's and that's it. That's where he's from. There's so many things here that are just incredibly obscure. There's a character named the Grizzly that shows up. He's kind of like a D-list Spider-Man villain. He's just a dude in a bear suit, and he's in jail too. They definitely made a list of like who are the lamest Spider-Man villains that we could just toss in there for like longtime Spider-Man fans.
Wow. Thank you for
but
the
yeah.
list, Dan. So talking about the end of this movie, I have to say, literally, I need to caveat anything I say about this movie because I don't know whether the complaints I have will be addressed in the next. It really does feel like half the movie.
It's okay.
But I think like I was a little bit disappointed because the movie opens, as I mentioned, with this beautiful section with Gwen, like Spider-Gwen, and like that whole thing, and the idea of like, oh, there's only one other person out there that understands what I've been through.
Mhm.
And it's like, and I can't see them, or it's hard to see. And it's like, it's such a beautiful idea. And I thought that was what the movie was going to be. I thought it was going to be about like, oh, finding this kind of kinship with other people that have been through what you've been through. Now, it is about that in some ways, but really quickly, the movie's scope kind of explodes, in my opinion. It's like goes into this big thing about like, it's about canon and how we need to like adhere to canon lest we destabilize the universe, right? That's kind of
Well, I think it's I think tonally, on a macro level, it's bad things have to happen sometimes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
sure,
Sure. And I
And-
think that's the hard thing for our characters to learn is that Uncle Ben's have to die. People in your life have to die. People, Captain Stacy's have to die. There are bad
Just
things.
don't become a captain.
Don't become a captain.
Never
Yeah,
take the promotion.
Yeah.
Just don't take the promotion.
Work around
Well,
it.
again, I don't know, Jeff, because I have a feeling he's going to like Miles is going to try to prevent his dad from dying, and it's like, is he going to succeed or is he going to fail and learn a valuable lesson? We don't know. We don't know.
Well,
This
so-
is
but I
where
think-
my problem with the film really comes
Mhm.
into focus is, in this film, you have every Spider-Man except for Miles Morales, who they do a great job of setting up like how he's a deviant, like
Yeah.
he is the
He shouldn't be.
person that never should have been Spider-Man.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's a brilliant follow through on the original film that had the 42 Spider fritzing out like it was from another dimension in that movie.
Yeah.
But that every single Spider-Man is an agent of destiny and is ostensibly like signed up with reinforcing the status quo
Right.
in the face of people dying, to me strikes really
Hmm.
wrong for the character. I just don't believe that is who Spider-Man is as a character. And people criticize the Amazing Spider-Man movies for being about destiny and predestination, and only Peter Parker could be fated for this role.
The Andrew Garfield ones, right? Who, by the
Yeah.
way, shows up in this movie as well.
Right,
But yeah.
right. But like this movie, like not just doubles down on that, it like 1,000-fold, like infinitely doubles down on that, which is like everyone was fated to be Spider-Man. And not only that, but they are willing to let people die to maintain that. And that just like I can see how it works for the movie to elevate Miles in that way, and that they're likely going to subvert that. Again, we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. Like
We
think,
also see
not-
disagreement within
not
the
to
group.
be
Right.
not to be a dick
Yeah.
and a broken record, but it's very possible the next movie is going to be like they're all wrong. They shouldn't be doing that.
I
Like,
mean
Right.
that
You know?
that seems to be the setup for
Yeah.
the thing, because
Certainly.
I think Daniel Kaluuya's character, who, by the way, fantastic,
Awesome.
Hobie,
Yeah.
amazing.
love the
character.
way he's animated, love how that he
Incredible.
is like against the system while also
so
being a part of this
funny.
club.
So
Well,
funny.
So
that's
funny.
the thing
Every
is that
line.
character doesn't even really have like a stake in it. He's just an anti-authoritarian. So whichever
Yeah,
the
but
way
he-
the wind blows,
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
willing to change his opinion.
But
you
he,
know?
he's a motivating force because he helps Miles kind of get out of the thing that
Yeah.
he's trapped in initially too. So there's all that. I'm really intrigued by Oscar Isaac's character because I think he presents a very compelling argument. It's like, hey, listen, like we see how the fabric of our universes work, and these things kind of have to happen, otherwise everything goes bad. And that he is so like devoted and kind of like a fundamentalist when it comes to that stuff. I'm very intrigued to see like what they're going to do here. I also don't know much about his Spider-Man. Like what's up with him being a vampire? They kind of
he,
show that
he is a
early on.
vampire. Yes.
Is this a straight up vampire? He's injecting blood like Blade
no,
or
he's
something.
not. His DNA is like tied up in spider DNA because he was addicted to a drug called Rapture. It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing.
It's a whole
But
thing.
it's just weird.
Don't
Like in
worry
one
about it.
moment,
you
we
can
see him
read
like
my
bare,
article if you
Yeah.
want. but
We
yeah.
see him bare fangs like early on in one of the scenes. I'm like, what is happening here? Like this is Blade territory.
Yeah, you see
That's
him get injected with something, and
Yeah.
that's like a drug that he's addicted to called
Hmm.
Rapture. And to back to the topic, like like I understand that they're looking to subvert it. I just don't believe that, like, and look, my life is too caught up in the character of Peter B. Parker. Like, I really relate to that character from the previous movie, but to see that character who was willing to give his life to save the other spider people at the end of Into the Spider-Verse until Miles stepped in and proved himself worthy, here just kind of going along with this, like reinforcing the status quo, which is like, Spider-Man is not a status quo character, right? Like, he is like the vigilante of all vigilantes. He's a teenager, which was really like unusual for the comics at the time to star a teenager. He's hated by the press. Like, and if you read the first 30 issues of Spider-Man, he's an asshole. He is not like, he's not a nice person, you know. And like, to see the character like of Peter B. Parker go along with this enough to like lie and be withholding, Spider-Gwen too, who is a punk rock character, to be withholding from Miles felt really, to me, kind of icky. And I know that those characters are going to go on an arc, but it felt really regressive for each and all of those characters.
Towards the end of the movie, there's supposed to be this big moment when Miles is like, you guys knew that I was a Spider-Man deviant or whatever, and you didn't tell. And it's like, is the idea that Spider-Gwen, I thought like Spider-Gwen and Peter Parker coming into the Citadel of Spider-Man was a relatively like recent development. And so it just felt like there's like one of the emotional climaxes of the movie is supposed to be like Miles realizing that like what his true origin is, and then being disappointed at his friends that they didn't tell him. And it's like, you just re-met Peter Parker like 10 minutes ago. Like, when was he supposed to tell you, you know? And you hung out with Spider-Gwen for like an hour. Like,
well, I think the idea is that they had access to get into his world, and if they were really his friends, they could have warned him or something. Like, I think that's part of it. Yeah,
fair enough. But yeah,
I mean, I think there's lines even before, you know, Jess Drew says, you know, he doesn't know, or you haven't told him, or something like that earlier.
Yeah,
I think it's all set up.
They've been gone for a year. Like, it's explicit that at least a year has passed since
like
the
a year and 4 months.
movie. You know, all of that rung true to me. That like, I think the first half of this movie is maybe my favorite first half of a Spider-Man movie. Like, the star that I didn't expect to like fall in love with Rio Morales. Every scene with that character talking to her son was just like tears for me, you know, just beautiful. Or even the little moments like when after the fight with the Spot, where Miles is like pretending to be Spider-Man or like around his father and putting on the voice, and the camera lingers on the tarp blowing over the structure is just so beautiful. Like, I would love to see a Miles movie without the Spider-Verse attachment, you know, like to it. Like, those characters are so rich, but you know, I'm willing to go along with it because they didn't forget about those characters. They are still like an emotional core to the film.
What did you think of the Spot as a villain? I thought it was incredibly realized as a concept.
I've sort of had a pet love of Spot as a villain for a long time. I think it's such a, you know, it's such a fun notion of having these portal, and like, I never thought that would show up in this movie. And the way it happens, first of all, the fact that his origin story is the moment we all remember from the first movie with the bagel hitting the guy in the head. Everybody remembers that because it's hilarious. And the fact that they plucked that out and made that the origin,
brilliant,
is so genius.
Love it.
So genius.
Yeah.
But I love how we start with him, you know, he's the big bad ostensibly in this movie. And we start with him in the most ridiculous, inept, goofy, ineffectual moment, you know, trying to steal the ATM machine. And it's a really wonderfully realized comedic sequence, and how we play that against him having to be at his, you know, principal meeting, and you know, through the window, we see the portals happen. All that stuff is just expertly done. And it belies the fact that this character is going to go on to be this huge impediment to our story. And I love that arc for that character of, hey, I'm not a monster of the week. I'm not, you know, small potatoes. I really am your nemesis. And to take, you know, just as they've done with all of the obscure spider characters, taking this very mundane, very throwaway villain and elevating them to, you know, big bad status. I just thought was a masterstroke and so unexpected and fun and subverting expectations.
It mirrors Miles in a great way too, because like Miles is the person who shouldn't be Spider-Man. Like everyone's telling him that now too, and they're both like, this is a self-actualization that they're both like on a journey towards, and one leads to being a supervillain, and the other leads to being like the real Spider-Man. I love that. I love when a villain is a great foil to the hero. Yeah.
Dan Gvozden, I feel like the Spot's origin story is very characteristic of Spider villains. Is that right? Where basically some like Spider-Man doing a hero thing accidentally does something else that makes this person have awful powers. Is that?
Yeah, that's really accurate. I'll add on to that too. It's usually about someone like gaining power through science and choosing to misuse it in some way.
Yeah.
I think it's brilliantly done in like Spider-Man 2, where you've got like, you know, that Peter interacting with like Dr. Octopus or Otto Octavius, who is a mentor figure and goes through a very similar transformation. And yet, you know, they water it down by having him be mind controlled in that movie. But like ostensibly it's, you know, or Norman Osborn, right? A scientist who gains power and uses it improperly. And so I think the Spot is a really fitting villain here. I wish he was threaded through the whole movie. You know, and
he does kind of vanish for like the second act, basically.
Yeah, I mean, the threat of it seems very much replaced by the threat of the Spider People.
Yes.
You know, in the second half of the movie. And again, it's why it to me feels very incomplete. Like that is a lingering note on the ending there.
A few things I just want to acknowledge real quick, like that are things I love. We haven't talked about Mumbattan, I think it is, South Asian Manhattan or South Asian, which is like incredible. It just like looks so cool.
So cool. The music's so good. Love that character.
Yeah,
oh, man.
yeah. So
that whole sequence of him like being like, "Oh, you two are into each other, aren't you?" And they're fighting crime
and
and
romantic tension.
Yeah, so great. It's so fun.
Love that. I had a really amazing like aha moment. Like the movie has lots of like, wow, I can't believe I just saw that. But there was like some really classic good storytelling, because the whole time they're building up to, is Miles going to tell his parents that he's Spider-Man? And so you're like waiting for it to happen. And then there's the fake out with Spider-Gwen outside the room, and you think she's listening on the conversation, but she's in a whole other universe. Very like Silence of the Lambs, like cutting between these two things that aren't really in the same place.
And it's so brilliant that he was sent to she took the DNA from the spider thing and sent him to the dimension from which
it's all set up. It's all like they tell you. They tell you everything. They're like, we're gonna do this thing, and then they do it, and it surprises you. You know, that's
so good.
Yeah, they even show it on the screen, like on the wristwatch. It says Earth 42.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, okay, yeah.
But you're like, at that point, you haven't been keeping track of all the Earths necessarily. And then when he reveals it, and she's like, "What are you talking about? That's like an amazing holy." It's like Marty McFly waking up at the top of Biff's tower. It's like it's like amazing cinematic moment that I really like.
I think that whole sequence with like the Uncle Aaron coming back in is like chilling and amazing.
Amazing.
The only reason it doesn't work for me is at the end is the movie opens with Miles, you know, kind of telling his story to the audience, right? Mimicking how the first movie opened, with Peter saying like, you know, I'm the one and only Spider-Man. And, you know, there's a popsicle, there's a cereal and all of that stuff. And the end of the first movie has this really powerful monologue of Miles coming to the realization of anyone can wear the mask. You can wear the mask, you know, and it's a beautiful thematic bow that's tied on that movie. Yeah. And here we get a similar moment. It's Miles running in the rain, you know, away, having abandoned the Spider People, which I also felt was kind of a repeat, like 2 movies ending on a train where Miles uses his Venom Blast to defeat the bad guy. But whatever, thematic, you know, loop. He's running in the rain. There's a real opportunity there, I think, for him to reflect on the journey again. Like, you know, anyone can wear the mask, and maybe that's not a good thing, you know, or whatever that moment is that could have tied up a thematic statement for this movie. They kind of ignore it in lieu of a cliffhanger. And I feel like you could have done both to at least let this movie have its own consistent statement to take away. And instead, I feel like, yeah, it's just half of a movie, like David's been saying.
Yeah. It really feels like The Matrix Reloaded, honestly. Can you take your self back to Matrix?
I'm right back there.
Right.
That's what I remember.
Think like Matrix 1, masterpiece, right?
Yep.
Ends like with a nice bow. Then Matrix Reloaded, you're like, oh, Neo's going to get them all out. Like, that's kind of what you felt at the end of Matrix. Matrix Reloaded begins like, guess what, by the way? Neo was just part of another system of control, And then Matrix 3 does some interesting things with that idea. People can argue about whether or not it was satisfying, but I am really curious. I don't think I've looked forward to the ending of a movie more than this one of like, I really want to know what is the movie trying to say about fate and systems of control and those kinds of things, because I don't think we know yet. I don't think
is this a dumb conversation? Like, it will only exist like this for a year of time or less than that.
In a year, we'll look back on this and be like, remember when we thought that was a bad idea?
I think this movie proves that we can have a little faith in these writers and these creators.
It's true.
The thing. But I distinctly remember the end of Reloaded being in the theater and also being in an audience that was definitely confused by everything that was happening in that movie. But being just like, you have the guy Smith in the real world, I guess, cut to black. I look around, everyone's confused.
Yeah.
Whereas with this movie, I look around, like everyone's like, "Oh my god, I cannot! I need more of this in my life."
It's true. Yeah. So Devindra points out something very, very accurate, I think, Dan, which is that I agree it's half a movie, and so it's half of the ideas, but it does send people out of the theater being like, "Wow, like what's the next part?" As opposed to what?
I think maybe the better comparison is the Two Towers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, did you feel I know it doesn't end quite as
we kind of knew that was like, we knew that was a whole trilogy setup, whereas I think a lot of people did not realize.
But I also think those movies have inherent thematic statements. Like the end of Fellowship is like about the breaking of the Fellowship, and it's like the end of Empire, where like they're looking over the galaxy. Frodo and Sam are looking over Mordor.
At the end of Two Towers, Sam gives that beautiful speech about doing good in the face of evil, and so it does feel more thematically complete. Two Towers feels more thematically complete than this movie does, I think. So, but anyway, any other closing? We didn't
talk about any specific sequence, but I just want to say the whole breakout from the like spider organization jail, just like. All the stuff happening. Yeah. You got the T-Rex Spider-Man, and then you go out and you're in Blade Runner world, Blade Runner future, and then you're in a rocket ship. They're going to the moon. And it's just like all these things. I'm like, man,
so many ideas.
So many ideas.
I love the Guggenheim sequence that it was like spiraling around the stairs of the Guggenheim, and then you've got the vulture Leonardo da Vinci thing,
so amazing,
which doesn't exist prior to this. That's not a reference, and it's like rebuilding itself using schematics while it's what a cool idea. I mean,
incredible.
Like if I sound negative about this, it's only because I think the first one is an utter masterpiece.
Yeah.
And I have to like distinguish between the two in my mind in some way, but like every second of this is just full of so much joy. Like we haven't mentioned that Donald Glover shows up as the Prowler here. Like there's just so many things.
All of the live action sequences. I mean, Andrew Garfield is in it actually, as an animated movie, fits itself into the larger MCU in a way. It's like it's part of everything.
Yeah. The moment I clap though is Lego Movie.
Yeah,
it's like yes. I was like, yeah, they're going there. It's all connected. And
as an Easter egg, that Daily Bugle is a real set, and it's built exactly the same way in the movie. I know, and the only one that made me go, the executives are mucking around in this is the Venom one. It's like we got to get the Venom one in, and maybe it's just because we don't love those movies.
I didn't even see the same way. Where was Venom?
Was he in the jail? The East Asian shopkeeper, right? That's the one. Is that the one you're referring to?
But also, like, what does Venom have to do with this? It just felt like, and I was waiting for it because you don't get to make you make Into the Spider-Verse quietly at Sony. You win an Oscar, suddenly the executives come around. And they want to get in one person.
I love that it just connects itself to everything. It connects itself to everything. And it wasn't like, Venom shows. You have to.
I mean,
you have
if
to
any
know
movie
that
deserves a crazy Tom Hardy, though, like that would have been kind of
Yeah.
icing on the cake if he does appear.
I
don't know.
just feel
Yeah.
like it's not Spider-Man. Like Venom is its own
Mhm.
thing now.
Yeah.
It's not Spider-Man related. It felt like we got to create Sony synergy. You know,
I was impressed at the video game tie. Like there's
Yeah.
the Insomniac version of Spider. The idea is that like
yeah.
the video game version exists in his own universe. That's now
Did
canon.
you see Genki's playing the
Yeah,
Spider-Man
he's playing
game?
Spider-Man,
Yeah.
which is like I don't even understand how that works. You know,
I
but
think
anyway.
if you look really closely, and I could be wrong about this, it's not actually a man that he's playing as. It's a man-sized spider. So it's a like
no. It's the Spider-Man with the arms coming out. It's one of the suits you can get in the Spider-Man game.
I think that was
Yeah.
my first impression was that
Oh.
is that what it was, but I think looking closer at it, I think it's actually a spider
Okay.
in the game. All
right.
That'd be a level of
I could be wrong.
cra-
I
I'm
could
that's
be
talking.
wrong.
I'm
like-
talking to an expert, so I will
I
stand down.
could be wrong.
Yeah.
But like that was my impression. Was
Yeah.
that
I
it
wanna-
was the game, but jokingly replaced with a spider.
All right.
I want to ask you something else, Dan, because before we got into the spoiler section, you mentioned that Into the Spider-Verse is obliquely or directly responsible for you having the gumption to be a dad. And I thought that's what Peter says too.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing, right? Peter literally explicitly says what you said, which is my experience in the last movie.
The previous movie.
Yeah. So-
It was really moving in the theater to hear that line. It wasn't unsurprising to me because that is the plot of that movie, you know, like and whether I needed to hear it from literally Peter Parker to make my decision or not, like I think the themes of that movie got me there.
Yeah.
But seeing it reflected in this way was moving. And to see like May or Mayday in this movie at basically the same age as my son is now was really emotionally powerful.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that kept me fully from embracing it is just what I mentioned earlier, seeing Peter Parker betray Miles in that way, and the depiction of that character being an agent of the status quo, as I put it. And
Yeah, it's like that scene from Man of Steel when Kevin Costner is like, "Let me die, Superman." You know, that's kind of like
How dare you
that's kind of
reference that scene?
yeah,
How dare you.
yeah,
We're
yeah.
talking about good movie.
I wanted to fully embrace that, but the more powerful moment is, I think, when he returns home and Mary Jane is with him, and you know, you see the image of Aunt May on the wall, who in his universe had passed away. So you've got this young girl that's surrounded by the two kind of like women in her life, you know, Aunt May on the wall and Mary Jane, and Peter is like looking down into the crib and he says to her, like, you know, do I, like, I forget the exact line, but he's like, do I have it in me to do this? You know, he's still questioning himself.
For sure.
And, you know, she reassures him, and, you know, any parent asks themselves that all the time. There's a fun little Easter egg in that scene too, where the stuffed animals that are next to May in the crib are the two villains that he beat in the previous movie. There's a Green Goblin and a octopus a plushie. But
it's really traumatizing this child. The whole thing with the baby, like during the adventure, I was like the parent on the playground being like, I don't know if that's responsible.
Yeah. Maybe,
I don't know.
Yeah. The character is reduced a bit to a joke in the movie, rather than being like a fully fleshed out character he was in the previous film. He is kind of the new dad that wants to show the picture to everybody, as I do the same thing, you know, with my son. So I appreciated it, and it was touching, and I'm eager to see where that character's arc resolves. I was pleased that he was the first one to kind of support Miles during the chase, and watching him fly using his robe was particularly pleasant. So anyway, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Jeff. It was, you know, that coupled with the stuff with Jefferson and Rio Morales, where it's, you know, you've got a character that is worrying about being strong enough for this young child. And then you've got characters that are on the opposite end of the parent spectrum, which are, are we able to let go of a child that maybe doesn't need us in the same way anymore? I thought that was really beautiful in terms of showing parenthood.
And then you also have Gwen and her dad's relationship with him sort of, you know, also worrying about her and coming to terms with her lying to him. Like all that stuff was really powerful to me about him understanding that, you know, his first reaction is, you've been lying to me this whole time. Like that was so powerful.
Yeah.
Like,
I
Also,
didn't
keep
quite
me up-
understand the reversal there, where he is like, I'm reading your Miranda rights, but then when he sees her again, he seems to have relinquished his role as a police officer. I wish we had more an insight into what that journey was like for him. But you know, it's such a beautiful looking movie that you're like, whatever.
Even that whole scene, like he fires a gun in the air, is just like it's a very like strange place to leave Gwen. I want to point out, by the way, speaking of parentage, like there's a character who's pregnant in this movie and is in the middle of the action. And again, something we never really see. So this movie is really like doing right by parents, I guess, and that theme of parenthood. Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, those are some thoughts on the first half of this movie. And we will find out in like 9 months or so whether or not we were right.
It's so funny to me, Dave, because I feel like you were not this harsh on Dune, and that's what my whole position.
Like that second movie wasn't even made. We didn't know it was going to be made.
Yes. And that's what my position on Dune was. Is like, this is only half a movie. How can I even judge it? And I don't think you had that issue with it at all.
So why are you so lenient, Jeff?
Because I think this movie. I think this movie is more complete than Dune Part 1.
No,
I completely agree with you, but
yes. Well, okay. I mean, here's my takeaway, Jeff, is I should have gone way harder on Dune. That's kind of that's my take. It's like, you're right. Now that you mention it, Jeff, I should have been.
I mean, we devoted a whole part of that review.
Let me just say, you say I've been harsh on this movie. I feel like I'm just making.
No, I don't. You're harsh on that point, is what I mean to say. You're harsh on that point.
I was watching this movie, The Guard. Have you seen The Guard?
That's great.
Great movie with Brendan Gleeson, and there's a moment when like this character walks in and starts talking to him, and he says, "Are you going to just keep making a series of declarative statements, or are you going to say something?"
Yeah,
and I'm like, Jeff, I feel like I'm doing is making a series of declarative statements about what's going on in this movie. That's all. I'm not like being exclamatory or
I think it's more like, given what they have given us in this movie, it's like. I think they will probably bring this one.
They'll probably stick the landing. They'll probably stick the landing. So anyway,
honestly, I agree with that, and I can't wait for more. But when I left the theater in Dune, I'm like, what do I even make of this? This isn't a complete thought. And it sounds like that's the experience you had with this movie, and that is not my experience with this movie. I feel like there's so much in it. Yes, there's a lot unresolved, and there are things that we don't know how they're going to go, but I felt like there's so much to take away from this already that felt emotionally satisfying, just thrilling on a visceral level. Like there's so much to it that I did not feel like it was just half a thing.
Fair enough. I think I don't know where the movie is going to stand on its central thesis, but I agree that there's a lot to take away that doesn't rely on that. So at the end of the day, it's really impressive that Joaquin Dos Santos, Kemp Powers, and Justin K. Thompson made a movie.
And Phil Lord and Chris Miller and everybody.
Indeed.
Like an animated movie requires a huge team. As much as the live action, but I think a ton.
Thank you so much for watching this video of the Filmcast. Check out these other videos that we have available, and be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get other videos from us in the future.
You can also go to thefilmcast.com to catch all of our audio podcast versions of all of our episodes.
And support this podcast at patreon.com/filmpodcast, where you can sign up for ad-free episodes and exclusive After Darks.
Thanks so much to everyone who makes the Filmcast possible.